In less than a month, I had to use 10 pregnancy tests. Every time those two bright red lines appeared, my heart skipped a beat while my mind screamed, "No way." I was a virgin, so what on earth was happening to my body? The more I tested, the more the results stayed the same. No exceptions. And when the doctor confirmed, my pregnancy hormones were perfectly normal, but the ultrasound showed an empty uterus, I knew I had fallen into a nightmare no one could ever imagine. I'm Sienna, 24 years old, a data analyst at a company in New York. Sounds impressive, right? But in reality, I spend my days buried in thousands of numbers, reports as long as novels, and endless meetings where people argue about whether the blue column looks better than the orange one. Honestly, sometimes I think my job is nothing more than fighting with Excel. That month, I was completely swamped with work. Deadlines piled up, followed by late-night calls from my boss. I lived on canned food, slept at odd hours, and my face broke out like I was a teenager again. One morning, while sorting through data, I suddenly felt dizzy, cold sweat dripping, my stomach twisting in knots. When a coworker asked if I was okay, I just forced a smile and bolted straight to the restroom. The whole day, I was exhausted and nauseous. I figured it was from chugging too many energy drinks, or maybe my stomach was just acting up. But later that night, curled up in bed, one completely irrational thought flashed through my mind. Take a pregnancy test. Sounds ridiculous, right? I was a virgin, a 24-year-old who'd never gone further than a few awkward kisses with an ex. But somehow that thought stuck to me like one of those annoying online ads you can't get rid of. So the next morning on my way to work, I stopped by a pharmacy and bought a box of tests. You know what? I only meant to do it for fun. Like, take the test, see one line, and then laugh at myself for being paranoid. But the second I dipped the stick, two blazing red lines showed up. I froze, staring at it for 5 whole minutes. My brain screamed, "No way. No, freaking way." I figured the test was defective, cheap, faulty manufacturing. So I rushed to the supermarket and grabbed every brand I could find, from bargain bin to top shelf. At checkout, I swear the cashier's eyes were screaming, "This girl must be seriously reckless." I wanted to shout right back, "I haven't even gone all the way once, okay?" That night, my tiny apartment turned into a mini science lab. I tested one stick after another. 1, 2, 3. By the end of a few weeks, I had gone through 10. And guess what? Every single one was positive. Yep, in less than a month, I'd tested 10 times. And every single time, those two mocking red lines showed up. I started to panic. Logic told me impossible, but reality kept smacking me in the face. I even Googled the symptoms: fatigue, nausea, loss of appetite. Check, check, check. My chest was unusually sensitive too. I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't wait any longer, so I booked an appointment at a clinic near my office. The female doctor looked at my rapid test results, then ran a blood test. A few days later, she called me back in. Her voice was deadly serious. "Your hormone levels are completely consistent with a pregnant woman." I laughed, the kind of nervous laugh you can't control, because the whole thing felt like a terrible joke. I explained I had never had sex, but the doctor's smile disappeared, replaced by a look of deep concern. She scheduled me for an ultrasound to confirm. I walked into the ultrasound room, my heart racing out of control. In my head, I kept reassuring myself, "They'll see it was a mistake, the screen will show nothing, I'm fine." But when the image flickered onto the monitor, the doctor frowned. She moved the probe slowly, checking carefully. Finally, she said something that made my whole body go cold. "The hormones say you're pregnant, but there's no fetus." The room spun around me. My ears rang. I forced myself to ask, "What do you mean?" It could be a false positive, or a rare condition involving hormones. But clearly, your uterus is empty. I sat up, my heart pounding so violently it felt like it might break through my chest. 1,000 questions screamed in my head. If I'm not pregnant, why did 10 tests all come back positive? And if I really am, then where is the baby? That night, I lay curled up under my blanket, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, those two red lines flashed before me. The feeling, both terrifying and absurd, made me want to scream. I realized I had stepped into a bizarre nightmare. I showed all the signs of pregnancy, but there was no baby. I thought I'd already hit rock bottom after hearing the doctor say, "Pregnancy hormones but no fetus." But that turned out to be just the beginning. The real nightmare started when I told my family. That evening, I called my mom. Her name's Caroline, 50 years old, a strict teacher, the type of woman who lives more by moral principles than emotions. As soon as I told her, the doctor said I tested positive, but there was no embryo. She went silent for a moment, then uttered just one sentence. "Tell me the truth. Who's the father?" I was stunned. I swear, that was the most painful thing I'd ever heard from her. I explained that I'd never had sex, that this was something abnormal we needed to figure out. But her tone only grew harsher, just like when I was a kid caught hiding a bad test score. She said I was playing childish games and bringing shame to the family. To make things worse, the story didn't stay within my family. Somehow, the news spread to my ex, Owen. We had dated for a few months back in college, but our relationship never went beyond holding hands, a few short kisses, and dinners together. Yet now, he was spreading rumors everywhere that I had made the whole thing up to trap him. In Owen's version of the story, I was a desperate girl trying to force him into responsibility by inventing a fake pregnancy. When the gossip reached my coworkers, my already stressful workplace turned into hell. Every time I walked into a room, I could feel the whispers, the subtle nods of agreement, the judgment hanging in the air. I caught snippets behind my back. She just made it up for attention. Even friends who had once been close started avoiding me, afraid of being dragged into the drama. The breaking point came when my boss called me into his office. His tone was sympathetic, but his eyes gave away his irritation. He suggested I should take some time off, unpaid, so the company could maintain a professional image with clients. In plain terms, I was pushed out of my job because of rumors I had no control over. While I was struggling to defend myself, something even more terrifying happened. In the parking lot near my office, a strange man approached me, claiming to be the father of my baby. I was stunned, denying it outright, but he acted completely certain, making up fake details, saying things like, "We met at a party," or "You were wearing a red dress." I had never seen him in my life. I thought it would be a one-off ridiculous stunt. But no. He began showing up more and more, even waiting outside my apartment door. I trembled every time I came home, my heart pounding when I peered through the peephole. Once he even tried to record me, forcing me to admit things on camera. I screamed down the hallway for help, and he ran off. But I knew clearly it wasn't over. I had to call the police. I hoped at least they would protect me from that stalker. But when they read my medical records, their faces changed. Instead of sympathy, they looked at me with suspicion, as if I'd invented the whole thing. One officer even asked bluntly, "Are you sure you're not imagining all of this?" I wanted to shout at them that I wasn't crazy, but even the medical evidence didn't side with me. It only made me look like someone good at lying. In my despair, I got hit with another shock. The hospital called with the initial DNA results from the embryo. I sat in the waiting room, gripping my hands so tight my nails dug into my skin. When the doctor came in, I braced for the worst, but what she told me went far beyond anything I could have imagined. The results show half the DNA matches you, Sienna. The other half doesn't match anything in any database. It felt like a thunderbolt. What does that even mean? Every person has a father. If the other half doesn't match any database, where'd that DNA come from? A stranger, someone off the grid, or something not even human? The room suddenly felt oppressively small. I felt backed into a corner, stripped of every escape. My family didn't believe me. My ex smeared my name. My employer cast me aside. The police doubted me. And now science offered no answers either. It was like being tried in a courtroom where I was both defendant and victim, and no one was on my side. I left the hospital and walked through crowded streets feeling utterly alone. In my hand was the DNA report. Half of it belonged to me, the other half blank, undefined. A raw, naked truth. I was pregnant with a person that didn't exist in any system. I thought I'd grown numb to shocks, but the truth was, each passing day dragged me deeper into a new layer of nightmare. After that half-human, half-undefined DNA result, I was barely sleeping. And just when I thought I might completely lose my mind, my father, Mark, the man who had vanished from my life more than 10 years ago, suddenly showed up at my apartment door. He looked older, his hair streaked with gray, his back slightly hunched, but his eyes were exactly as I remembered from childhood. I froze, caught between shock and anger. The first words out of his mouth weren't an apology or an explanation, but, "I have to protect you. You and the baby too." I almost laughed bitterly. Protect me? The man who abandoned us for a decade, leaving Mom and me to fend for ourselves, now standing here playing the hero? But as I looked closer, I saw something in his eyes beyond regret, something deeper, a buried fear. That night, Mark sat in the living room and told me that our family had a history of strange births, cases that couldn't be explained by ordinary medicine. Children were born completely healthy, but the conception process was always murky and controversial. He said I wasn't the first, and maybe I was just the next link in a chain of anomalies that had existed for generations. I listened, trembling. Part of me wanted to believe he was inventing the story to justify disappearing for 10 years. But deep down, what I'd been through made it impossible to dismiss. It was all too irrational to be mere coincidence. One night, as I shifted on the sofa, I heard Mark on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low, but every word reached me clearly. We can't let what happened before happen again. I held my breath, my heart pounding. Who was he talking to? What happened before? I stepped quietly closer, but when the floorboards creaked, he whirled around and hid the phone behind his back. His face flickered. Then he forced a smile and pretended he was just catching up with an old friend. I stayed silent, but I knew for sure he was hiding a huge secret from me. A few days later, a team of doctors from Harvard contacted me. They said my case was very unusual, almost identical to a failed experiment they had once studied. I was stunned. When I asked for more details, they wouldn't disclose anything, only inviting me to join a confidential research project. They promised to cover all medical expenses, as long as I agreed to provide data and biological samples. I hesitated, but inside I ached for an explanation. At least someone wouldn't write me off as a liar or crazy. I was almost about to agree until an anonymous email landed in my inbox. The attachment was a blurry scanned document with the logo of a pharmaceutical company that had been dissolved more than 2 decades ago. It clearly stated, Mark Dawson, subject of recombinant hormone trials clinical phase. I froze. They had experimented on my father, and now, somehow, I was bearing the consequences. I looked at Mark, who was standing by the window, quietly smoking under the sickly yellow streetlight. He turned, caught my eye, and in that instant, I understood that he knew I had uncovered everything. No words were needed. The truth hung between us. I was, indirectly, the product of an experiment he had once participated in. The genetic ghost, stretching across generations. A cold shiver ran down my spine. If that was true, then what was growing in my belly was not just an ordinary child. It was living evidence of medical wrongdoing, of a family's secret someone had tried to bury. And I, reluctantly, had become the heir to that tragedy. On the day they announced the final results, I sat in the hospital's cold white room, my palms slick with sweat. 3 doctors walked in together, each holding a thick file. The lead doctor, his voice solemn, began, Miss Sienna, we have an official conclusion. You are indeed pregnant, but the conception did not occur through natural means. The air seemed to freeze. I sat up straight, swallowed dry, waiting for more. The doctor flipped to another page and lowered his voice. The fetus's DNA matches you in part. The remaining portion matches an old test sample in our medical database from over 20 years ago. The room spun in front of my eyes. An old test sample? Does that mean the baby inside me is connected to an experiment that took place before I was even born? I turned to Mark. His face was pale, his clenched hands trembling. Finally, he exhaled, as if releasing a burden he'd carried half his life. When I was young, I took part in a research program. They promised money, said it was just a hormone supplement. None of us really knew what they were doing. I thought it had ended long ago. I sat there in stunned silence. Everything I was carrying now was nothing more than the aftershock of a desperate choice made in the past. An experiment my father never imagined would leave its mark on the next generation. While I was still struggling with that truth, the police delivered another piece of news. The strange man who had stalked me, claiming to be the baby's father, had been arrested. He was nothing but a deranged opportunist, the kind who latched onto sensational cases to insert himself and chase a scrap of cheap notoriety. The bitter irony hit me, days of terror caused by him, when the real secret had never been in his delusional claims, but buried in the medical system and my family's past. Time passed, and my belly grew. Then the day finally came. I lay in the delivery room, drenched in sweat, my heart racing as if it would explode. And when that first cry pierced the air, tears spilled down my cheeks. The baby was perfectly healthy, rosy, whole, with 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes. The doctors sighed in relief, but then one of them froze after a closer check. His brow furrowed as he quietly conferred with his colleagues. I pressed them anxiously, and they explained that the baby carried a rare genetic marker, something never before seen in any human. It wasn't a disease, not a defect, just a strange anomaly that science had no name for. I held my child against my chest, overwhelmed by both fear and awe. My baby looked perfectly normal, an angel, flawless in every way. But deep inside, they carried a secret the world had never known. Mark stood in the corner, his eyes red. I looked at him, torn between anger and compassion, angry that his past experiments had dragged me into this nightmare, but compassionate because I saw him trying, at least to make amends through the love he now gave his grandchild. I know my life will never go back to normal. Whether others believe it or not, whether science has an explanation or not, I will always be tied to this secret. And the child in my arms is living proof of something that neither I, nor my father, nor those doctors fully understand. I kiss my baby on the forehead and whisper, if I have to live with a secret that has no answer, then I will choose to love you, rather than fear you. Sometimes the truth isn't simply a matter of believe it or not. Sometimes all we can do is accept it and keep moving forward with it. If it were you, what would you do? Would you sue the hospital to seek justice? Would you forgive your father for a mistake from the past? Or would you see it all as a miracle? Odd, yes, but still a gift from life.